When looking to talk to you, you mentioned talking to program officers as far as what their research needs are. How do you go about doing that, besides finding the contact number?
Yeah, I mean that's really the first one. There are different ways that we can find the wild program officer in their environment. In some ways, the first contact might be by email. I mean, because some of these program officers were scattered around the world. I'm here in Canada, but chances are you're not going to find me. So probably an email contact first, which could be followed by a follow-up call on the phone. My preference when I hear from people, and also when I'm doing, is I always like to send an email first that provides a bit of context, and then I follow up with a phone call a little bit later. And what the email does, and I do this when someone says, so hi, I sent you an email, I'm interested in work with the UN, I want to ask you some questions. I've forgotten who the person is, and so I go through my Outlook email and find their email so that while I'm talking to you on the phone, I've got some of the things in front of me. So it helps remind me. So that's the way to do it. That's the initial contact. But before you do that, make sure you've done some research on the organization too. So because this generally doesn't happen with graduate students, actually. This happens when undergraduates come to me. They say, oh, I'd love to work for your organization. I'm really, really committed with climate change, and so the convention biodiversity is where I want to work. And I'm thinking, but that's not the focus. I mean, I can send you my colleagues in Bonn, but do that kind of research to know where that area goes. The other place you can meet us is, as I said, is if you follow, for instance, for our organization, because we have meetings, you can find out where the meetings are taking place, and you can maybe look at those or follow them, but in that respect.
It says in the UN where you write some exams so that you can be part of a pool of eligible applicants in the future?
There are different qualification exams. Different countries have that. I know that for the United Nations Development Program, they do have a series of qualifying exams that you can take. Now, the problem with many of these qualifying exams, especially if you are Canadians, is that they're really organized at the national level, right, where different countries put them together. Canada has, my sense over the years, they don't always hold these examinations every year. In fact, I think it's been a period where they haven't done it for several years indeed. So for many of you, unless you are of a nationality in the country where they have these qualifying exams, this is something where you may not necessarily fit in. But it also depends for different agencies. For instance, for us in the Secretariat, we don't take anybody who does the qualifying exams. In fact, with the United Nations Environment Program, I'm not aware of the qualifying exams. I know that UNDP does it, and then I know that Secretariat headquarters in New York might do that for some of those areas too. But that is something else to consider. I would say you want to think about that in addition to all these other tools you do, is because you can do the qualifying examinations, but you still need to make sure that you've got the other sort of background conditions to make sure you have the job you want.
So when you go on the website and you find some positions that appeal to you that are advertised as being available, you just go about applying to them as you would on any other site?
You can. I mean, there's a website. I mean, there's the website called jobs.un.org. Now, I used to put that up on the slide here, and the reason I stopped it for a minute is because I think a lot of people would just go there and just apply for the jobs right away. And one of the arguments I would have is that, before you start applying for the jobs.un.org, I think you want to have your strategy. I think just applying for them on there, unless you've got other background and sort of backup plan, it's not as efficient. And I myself am also guilty of this even as an employee. I have applied just for jobs on a whim. I had a bad day at work and going like, I'm getting out of this place, I'm going to work somewhere else. And it takes a lot of time, I mean, to fill out the personal history form, etc. And none of those panned out, in fact. The only ones where I've gotten interviews for other possibilities are ones where I've done the other steps, where I actually met some people in the agency, I corresponded with them by email in the first place, that kind of thing. But you can apply. I mean, if you want to look at some of these descriptions, you can go to jobs.un.org, and I think you've got to create a whole profile and stuff now, but you can take a look at the jobs in the compendium. And it's kind of interesting, is because you can see where the posts are, you can see some of the descriptions, and the way that the jobs are described. In fact, the thing is, the way the jobs are described on the board, I get confused sometimes too. I'm thinking, what do they really mean in this one here? Because it's done in a particular sort of program language. In some ways, you still need to do more research in the agency and say, okay, what is this job really about? The personal history form, if you want to do it, you can create one and save it, and it's something you may want to think of because it's a long-term thing. In fact, they want you to put work experience back to the time you're 14. I discovered that's really important. Actually, my salary is a little bit higher because I put in my job working at Skydome as a ticket seller or something like that. It made a difference. But these are actually important things. But it's an extensive process. And just like you do for any CV, you want to be really careful about the way you fill in that personal history profile form too. I mean, when you describe what you've done in your previous jobs, you might have to change it. Like, if you're going to apply for a job at the World Intellectual Property Organization and you're a lawyer, you want to highlight the work you've done in intellectual property areas. whereas for another job you might change it slightly differently.
Are you currently based in Montreal?
Yes, yeah, the Secretary of the Convention is based in Montreal. In Canada, Montreal I think is really the biggest duty station for UN agencies because we, the Secretariat, are there. We're about 70 people. There is the UNESCO Institute for Statistics is at the University of Montreal, and that's also about 70 people. The Multilateral Fund for the Montreal Protocol on the Ozone is also located. That's about 20 people that manages mostly funding areas. And then there's also the biggest employer in town is the International Civil Aviation Organization, which employs about 500 people and is a UN agency as well. Those are the biggest ones. So Montreal's a big duty station. On the continent, of course, New York is a big duty station for a lot of other UN jobs. Beyond that, the other cities where you can find sort of a concentration of jobs are Paris, Geneva, Bonn is important. Rome is big for food because the Food and Agriculture Organization is there, along with a number of associated specialized agencies. The United Nations Environment Program is in Nairobi, and so that's why I'm connected to the UN. And so that's the main headquarters there, and there are a lot of jobs at UNEP down in Nairobi. And then there are regional commissions too. Panama is the regional, some regional offices. Jamaica has got offices too, Bangkok, etc.